Welcome to First Answers. This is episode 5 in the series A Parent's Guide to Gender Identity. In this episode, you can learn the process children go through developmentally to acquire their gender identity. Understanding this process will help you to also see how you can play a vital role in influencing your children's gender identity as male or female. Visit firstanswers.com to find more about the podcast and answers for 21st century parents.
In this episode of Gender Identity Formation, I'm going to describe the levels of development that children go through from childhood to adulthood so that you can see where in each location you might have some influence and also how you might exert the influence so that it has the most effective application to your children. In the last episode, I described that there are 3 levels of development, one of which is the acquisition of self-knowledge so that children develop an inner core of ideas and beliefs about themselves, then seeing the family as a small community where these ideas that children have in their knowledge base are confirmed or validated or not validated by what happens in families and what their experiences are. And then the third level is, of course, the broader social exposure, where children go out with friends, meet other adults other than their parents, and have a variety of contact. And from this contact, they confirm or disconfirm both their family experiences and the inner core that they've acquired along the way. Some of these inner core forms of self-knowledge, for example, include beliefs like, I am a girl, and this is what girls do, and I like this part of being a girl, or I don't like this part, and the idea of thinking about and forming a concept of gender that children like based on their sex is an important way of looking at this so that you can think, well, I want my children to develop a healthy body image. They enjoy being able to think of themselves as male or female and so forth. In this episode and in the next one, I'm going to address the idea of understanding children's experiences about gender, their interpretations of their experiences, what it means to confirm or disconfirm the ideas they have, and then explore the possibility of something called validations, or where they form conclusions that last a long time. For children, learning about themselves is usually a desirable activity. They like to know about themselves. They like to know what you think. They like to know what they think when they're alone, and they look at mirrors and watch how they walk and so forth. So I am proposing that you engage your children in promoting a positive gender identity, and you will likely see your children respond with great interest. In other words, it will motivate them to spend time with you so that they can learn about themselves. The old adage, your children will care what you know when they know you care, is applicable here when you invest in helping your children see themselves realistically and positively, meaning that it's useful to have safety and warmth and affection involved along the way so that when you teach about gender, your children do not have a lot of anxiety. I'll talk about anxiety later because anxiety is a fragmenter of human growth, and if there's a lot of it in a child's life, it's very hard for the human brain to consolidate all their ideas into an identity. Now, where gender is concerned, it is desirable for both parents to have positive relational experiences with their children. This is well known, but it's interesting how quite often we forget that as the children are on their way to growing up. For example, a father might see a daughter's body change during puberty and decide that it would be better to not hug her as much or spend time with her or be affectionate with her when that is exactly what she needs more right at that point. So in many families, fathers withdraw their affection right when the daughters need it the most. And quite often, mothers will consider that being affectionate with sons should include just praising them and telling them how wonderful they are, instead of putting their arms around them and holding them close during times of consoling and so on, giving them a pat here and there. And those are important things for both fathers and mothers to do. Loving parents often create good activities and experiences for their children, assuming that the nature of the activity will promote growth of some kind. Want to learn how to play baseball, want to learn how to dance, and so on. Parental examples will be observed and applied by children in each of these activities. Boys want to know if their dad can throw well, for example. However, what children learn about themselves and others will come not so much from what the child experiences, but from how they and their parents interpret the experience. And once you understand this, you can develop methods of inviting your children to interpret their experiences constructively. You can also ensure that your children will search for more than one interpretation of any event or activity. I'll give you an example. Suppose a little girl is considered a tomboy. She goes out and spends time with girls, and they ridicule her because she's, quote, not as petite and feminine as some of those are. How do you want this tomboy daughter to interpret that experience? Well, we'd like her to interpret that it's perfectly okay being a tomboy, and there are a lot of good things that tomboys can do. And that we can talk about other things that that daughter can learn, which also helps her be confident in being female. Now, if these interpretations are not constructively addressed, then your children could have a mistaken view of one or more of their experiences and may grow up believing something about themselves which is not accurate. Now, for instance, young children whose parents are divorcing often wrongly feel they're responsible. Imagine that. A 6-year-old's parents are getting divorced and he or she feelings for a long period of time like they caused it for some reason, unless the parents and or a counselor or somebody will help the child understand that they had very little to do with what happened between their parents. Making sure that children have good experiences and then helping them interpret these experiences accurately is a powerful influence to help them form a positive identity, especially a positive gender identity. Specifically, where gender identity formation is concerned, I'll give you an example that it goes on all of the time or quite often. Those who are promoting gender transitioning, which is surgery to change parts of bodies, and medical care often use the words gender is assigned at birth. This is a flagrant misinformation because gender is assigned at conception and usually recognized at birth. Another statement which these people use includes the idea that hormonal treatment and other forms of medical care is necessary, otherwise children may commit suicide. This statement is also untrue given that there is hardly any supporting research data that's conclusive. So what do you believe? Well, you might believe that parents who learn about gender identity can do more and become more effective at helping their children. Please believe that. And if needed, psychotherapy can help as well. So what could you do or what should you do? When should you start sex typing your children? That is referring to them as males and females. Well, I am going to propose that you should start at or before birth. Gender identity takes a while to form and become stable, so it is in your best interest to help children kindly and honestly learn about being male and female and the positive possibilities for each of those. In the behavioral sciences, there has been tremendous interest in identity, self-concept, and self-esteem. A review of this effort identifies 3 experience areas which every person has some contact with. The things children learn in these three areas are what influences the growth of an identity that parents want. Self-knowledge, or an inner core of self-knowledge, is not neutral. As children learn about themselves and others, some very powerful experiences are involved. And this episode is designed to help you and your children form a solid, accurate, secure, and healthy identity so that they will know who they are as male or female and what they can do. Now, please take the time for just a minute to perform a small practice session of free agency and link that to one of your beliefs. For example, ask your child this question. Please name 4 positive qualities you believe to be true about yourself. He might be 6 or 7, or she might be 7 or 8. Then, please describe how you actually carry out or express those qualities. So you're asking each child what they believe to be true and then how they express them. Well, why do that? Because we want to see how much they know, how well they know it, and we'd like to see whether or not they can express these qualities in terms of how their behavior is. Now take a look at some crucial steps. Experience. What does the word experience mean? Now, before you learn about the experience areas involved in identity formation, which I've already identified, first consider some foundational ideas. As I learned and proposed in the last episode, freedom and self-awareness are almost always involved in identity. For example, the word experience can mean being a witness of something, participating in an activity, learning, communicating with others in that situation, and whatever emotional response accompany these experiences. Experience provides the basis for the belief that a child has about himself as male or female. Then what does interpretations do? Interpretation organizes the experience and makes it understandable. When you ask your children to tell you how they view something they have done, you're asking them to interpret it. Why does something happen? Who caused it? Is it good, and therefore are you good? What do other people think of me? If they are positive, then am I good and positive? What if I think others do not like me? Am I inferior? If you ask those questions to your children, you might be startled at the answers they give you, because a lot of children believe that if they're not liked, they're also not worthwhile and they're inferior, which is absolutely false. I'll give you a practical example of this, which is a source of sadness for me and the people who are involved. A woman I know was assaulted by 2 boys when she was a student at college. She was so embarrassed and ashamed she didn't tell anyone at first. And then when she finally told her parents, she was stunned at her father's response. He wanted to know what she did to cause those boys to be aggressive. She said nothing. But the message from her father had already been received, that she was somehow inadequate or somehow had caused the trauma in her life, lasted for many years until professional help enabled her to change her interpretation. That's why when you're talking with children and you take a look at their experiences, instead of just measuring good or bad or obedient or disobedient, make sure that the child will tell you what their experience is, how the child interpreted it, so that you can decide whether or not to adjust their interpretation to something that is probably more accurate and more favorable from your point of view. What does confirmation mean? Confirmation means to add information about the experience and the interpretation, creating a perception that is true or accurate. Now, please note that children can experience, misinterpret, and believe something to be true, which is not true. I emphasize that because in my clinical practice, I see that often. I've seen a lot of kids who have low grades in school and think they're stupid or dumb. Or a girl who has had a bad experience with a boyfriend and who believes she's unattractive and always will be. Now imagine that one day in an argument, a boy is told he is dumb by a sibling or classmate. He might first interpret that statement whether it applies to him or not. Does that apply to me, or is it that kid just saying it? Now, if the person who called him that name is credible, the child might feel hurt or humiliated, worrying that it might be true. If he thinks it might apply, then he will be looking at other experiences to confirm if indeed he is dumb. Quite often, when he actually achieves and performs well, he ignores the evidence that he is not dumb because he has believed prior to this that he is, and instead disregards the achievement as unimportant. And if he happens to be unsuccessful at school, he may let the idea persist. Many smart children think they are dumb instead. One man I learned from told about the time when he was a young adult, was traveling and stopped at a rest stop. He was approached by a gay man seeking sex of some kind. He was inexperienced sexually, but knew what was being proposed by this person, and he refused. But later on, he began to wonder what that person saw in him in order to proposition him, even though he had dated girls and had felt a strong sexual attraction to them. For several months thereafter, he said, he worried that he might be homosexual and wanted to learn more to find out. He dated more, kissed a girl for longer than a few seconds, and finally concluded he was not homosexual. Now, please notice he wanted to confirm or disconfirm the experience and the interpretation of it. You might be thinking, well, that wouldn't happen to my child. Well, you ought to spend time listening to kids talk to each other nowadays, and it'll amaze you what they say to each other. 12 or 13-year-old girls easily say to the others, "Oh, Heather, you're gay." And they mean, kind of socially strange. But that word also means, no, you're gay and you're a lesbian. And then if friends say that to that child, then they think, well, maybe I am, and so on. So let's examine also what validation is, or the conclusion. Imagine that another child calls this boy who's been called dumb the same name, and at about the same time he receives a failing grade on a test. Now he'll choose how he decides to interpret that. He interpreted that the name used by his peers applied to him, and he has confirmed that belief is true because he failed the test. Now, if this sequence is repeated, it can validate a firm belief that he lacks some mental skills. Years ago in my clinical practice, I saw so many boys and girls who thought themselves inadequate because they were defeated by the schools. I gave them a part of an intelligence test, which is the best children's intelligence test around, and then I showed them their score and pointed out what it meant. Well, any child that I did that to would score average or above, which means, okay, they're not stupid. Quite often, though, the kids who thought they were the least mentally skilled were also often very bright and had a hard time believing the results of the test until I gave them another experience. Now, before going on, I want to review. In the case of the boy where a sibling said, "You're dumb," he had an experience that he interprets to be accurate. Then he's looking for information and confirms this idea through additional experiences. And last, with repeated experience, he might conclude that his idea is true. This is the crucial process used by children to acquire knowledge they believe to be true or untrue about themselves, and which become part of their sense of gender. Now, in addition to that, imagine that boys associate with other boys and they're looking at them and saying, well, I'm kind of like that, or I'm not like him, or I am like that. I can run and throw, and I think and look and so on like a boy. Girls do the same with girls and so on. But they also enjoy being with each other and saying, well, I'm not like that because he's a boy, or I'm not like that and he's a girl. And both those kinds of experiences are going on. You might be interested in knowing about it's sort of an obscure form of research, but it's really fun. And it has to do with sexually available males and females, or sexually attractive males and females. So suppose boys are talking with each other and laughing and doing boy things with each other, and an attractive girl enters the room. Boys' behavior change dramatically. The same is true for girls. So girls are laughing, talking, visiting, sharing details of their lives and so on. An attractive boy walks in, their behavior changes dramatically immediately. Well, why? Partly because they would like to be attractive to that person and they don't want to be unattractive. But in addition to that, they are already working on their gender and they want to carry it out in a positive way. So as it turns out, this whole process of having experiences, interpreting them, confirming them or disconfirming them through the interpretation, then finding some confirmation or additional information about it, and then validating them by saying, yes, this is valid, this is true. That process goes on hundreds, thousands of times related to gender until whenever late adolescence occurs, and the diffusion, that is the undirectedness and unpredictability of gender, consolidates, and their brains say, I am a male or a female. I repeat, you can have influence in this process if you'll understand how it happens and then begin to make practice with your children to help a positive gender identity form.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the First Answers podcast, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Find First Answers on Facebook and remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the Podcasts app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about First Answers. Check out another podcast by Dr. Scoresby called The Christ Questions, which is centered on questions we ask about Jesus Christ and questions he asks us. Dr. Scoresby examines how Christians can build faith in Jesus Christ that lasts and discover the true blessings and rewards for believing.